base runner. He looked excellent in those first 3 2/3 innings. He was mixing up his pitches. He was hitting the zone, and the Yankees just sort of had no answer for him until Gary Sanchez hit a home run off him with 2 out in the 4th, and then really downhill from there. But I thought, and as you mentioned, that was an example of him showing signs of, maybe we got something here when you look at him. But as you mentioned, also the inconsistency plays there as a rookie, as it should be. But yeah, certainly very interesting piece there. Is there anyone else on the roster in particular that we should probably cover before we sort of move on to, I guess, the future?
In terms of pitching or hitting?
Just anyone overall, really.
I felt like Sam Gaviglio has been a pleasant surprise for the bullpen. He started off really well, and in the long inning relief role, he's been really effective. As of late, he's been kind of struggling, but yesterday night he had some solid innings of shutout ball. I also under the radar player only pitched in one game for the Blue Jays, Jacob Waguespack. I believe he played in the game in Tampa, and he really racked up the strikeouts in that game. He did give quite a few runs, and that's why he has a 4.5 ERA. But I feel like his stuff plays well, and like Gaviglio, I feel like Waguespack could be like a rotation piece in the future for depth, and if not, he can be a really solid piece in the bullpen.
And to think we got him for Aaron Loop, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, and I remember Jacob saying something along the lines of, "Oh, people like me are not supposed to be here," as he was undrafted. So it's a really cool story to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime you can find like some guy that just can perform anything to a big league roster without being drafted, I think that's, you got to give it up to your scouting team for that. And really, the Blue Jays will have a lot of opportunities to do that this year, as sort of 2019. Many refer to the season as an audition year. Sort of a lot of guys that come in here not really knowing what you're going to get out of them, but maybe if you throw enough towels at the wall, a few will stick. And that's sort of what the Blue Jays are hoping. They're hoping to find players that can potentially help them in the future. And in terms of the current roster on the team, in terms of the veteran guys, you look at this Blue Jays lineup up and down, where left and right on the infield, outfield. Danny Jansen, Freddie Galvis, Randall Grichuk, Rowdy Tellez. All these guys are good major league players, with the exception of Danny Jansen, I guess, who's still yet to prove himself. But I think all those guys are potentially good players, but can they be good for you when you contend? That's sort of the question. And the Blue Jays determined that Randall Grichuk was one of those guys, offering him a 5-year deal really into the first week of the year. That was 2 months ago, and 2 months later, how do you feel about that extension? Has the season that he's had made you feel good about the extension, or a little less good? What are your thoughts on that?
In terms of the Randall Grichuk extension, I wasn't too high on him. I've never been really high on the player as in Randall Grichuk before his Blue Jays years. But when he did come into Toronto last year, he got traded for, I believe it was Dominic Leone. He did have some moments where I felt like this guy could be a quality contending piece for the Jays, who will show up when they need him the most. And we've tried him out this year, and I feel like he's underperformed to an extent where he's only hitting .227 right now. He does have 12 home runs, but his strikeout numbers are still inflated, and his discipline at the plate isn't the best. To offer him a contract right now in the year, in the first week, I say it wasn't appropriate. I feel like they should have waited out at least mid-season or the off-season to judge how he did this year. But in my opinion, I don't think he was deserving of that contract at that time.
Yeah, it's a bit of a different point. As you may not know, I'm a big Randall Grichuk fan. I was really a big fan of this move, mainly because of not so much the terms. Obviously, 5 years for a guy who, I should have the age right now. What is he? He's entering his age 27 season, I believe. I mean, that's not particularly old to offer a guy 5 years, but I think more about what Joe Nicari said about the WAR system, the wins above replacement, about how a player is $8 million worth each WAR, which every win above replacement that he's earned. And I look at Randall Grichuk, sort of the player that he's been his entire career, ever since he came up with the Cardinals in 2014. So that's 6 seasons of big league baseball. Well, parts of seasons, but he's accumulated a WAR of 9.7 in that time, and if you sort of translate that through 4 to 5 years, you have a 2-win player. And according to the WAR system, a 2-win player should probably earn about $15 to $16 million in the MLB today. So I thought you got him for pretty cheap, and he's a guy who can play every day for you, a guy who can play good defense. And again, problem is, as you mentioned, the walks. He doesn't have a great eye at the plate. He tends to wide the zone, but he can hit the ball hard. And so that's why I thought he could be a guy that the Blue Jays can contend with moving forward. I guess that's just a difference of opinion. Interesting debate up there.
Yeah, and I feel like he's young and controllable, but I also feel like the Jays have those pieces like Teoscar Hernandez. I feel like they're very identical in players.
Yeah, but I mean, it's hard to feel all that good about Teoscar Hernandez. I mean, not like so far we've seen a guy who, he's got some tools. He's got tools to be a good big league hitter, but obviously last year we know the defensive struggles, and this year he just got called up yesterday. He played his first game yesterday, but the bat really hasn't been there this year. I understand why you would want to bring up Teoscar Hernandez, sort of give him a shot. Once again, throw them at the wall and see if they stick. But at the same time, I think that Teoscar Hernandez is not all that young. I mean, he's 26 years old. That's a year younger than Randal Grichuk. Just because he hasn't been in the league as long, I think that should not be a reason why you should expect a whole lot more out of him. I think Randal Grichuk is the better player. And I remember arguing with some Jays fans on Twitter about this last April, about how Randal Grichuk, despite the start, was a better player than Hernandez, and I think that's sort of coming true this season. But no doubt, I think Hernandez will get more of an opportunity here now that he's up, and we'll see what he can do.
No doubt about it. And I have a question for you. How do you feel about Elvis Luciano?
I feel like he's a guy who clearly is not ready to be in the big leagues. I feel like he's an arm that you definitely should keep. The Blue Jays should keep Elvis Luciano on the roster for the whole season. You're not contending. There's really no point why you should lose, a guy who could potentially be a good arm for you. And, the Blue Jays' depth, not a whole lot of depth in terms of pitching through their minor league system. I think if you're the Blue Jays, you got to sneak him onto the roster the rest of the year and then basically run him through your pipeline and see if you can get something there. He's very young. I mean, he's a guy who's born in 2000. So anytime you hear, a season like a birthday that doesn't start in the 20th century, you should probably give a guy more than a look than what he's seen so far. So just my opinion, not a guy who really should be utilized much this year, but a guy that I'd want to keep for the future.
Yeah, I've been speaking about depth and injuries. One thing about the Blue Jays this year is they've been pretty unlucky in terms of pitching depth and injuries all around. And as we've seen from the very get-go, Ryan Borucki has not started the season with the Blue Jays. And I feel like he was supposed to be a really solid player for them. And how do you feel about the injuries that have rattled the Blue Jays this year?
Well, obviously, knowing the Blue Jays, that's nothing new, particularly in the injury front. That's sort of been the trend over the last few years or so, unable to stay healthy, especially in the pitching side of things. And, that's a big reason why Edwin Jackson is starting tonight and currently got 2 runners on in the first inning, looking for the last out.
Kendrys Morales.
Yeah, he's batting. Kendrys Morales is batting. Thankfully, and, this could come back and bite me in the next start, but Clayton Richard has been okay this year in his 3 starts. Obviously, your expectations are on a curve with a guy like that, a fifth starter. He's probably going to put up fifth starter numbers, but I think having him as a big league arm is a lot better than maybe, a guy like Ryan Fairbairn, where we saw, make a start, or, even Daniel Hudson having to start upon as an opener. So I think that will help, and obviously Borucki, when he comes back, that'll obviously help as well. The injuries, they've just been nothing new, and it's sort of, here we go again with this team. And we've come to know that the pitching depth really lacks in terms of in the Blue Jays organization. The last few years, they've used a lot of starters, and really none of the guys that they had backing up their front starters have been any good, and that's a big reason why they haven't been as successful the last few years, because they just don't have the depth to afford many injuries.
Yeah, for sure, and we've seen injuries with Ryan Borucki this year, And we've also seen it with a signed player in the offseason, David Phelps, who hasn't played. Also, John Axford, we re-signed him. He has yet to play this season. Jacob Wagsback, as I mentioned before, is also injured. And I just feel like these players would contribute, but to an extent, you feel it's like they could contribute, but in a contending team, depth is needed, but it's okay to give tryouts to players in the minor leagues.
I'll tell you what sort of bugs me, and this is ironic considering that Edwin Jackson just struck out Morales and the inning is now over, which is pretty good. I don't like the idea of having Edwin Jackson start games for you. I'd much rather, see the Blue Jays utilize an opener more. I mean, I thought that coming to the season, talking about Charlie Montoyo coming from a Rays organization where we see the opener be very frequent and very effective over the last few years, I would like to sort of see them utilize that spot a little more. Obviously, a lot easier said than done. In order to have an opener, you have to have good depth and you have to have more arms. So it's not as easy as it seems, but me personally, the way Tampa has sort of changed the game with this opener, I find it very interesting, and that's just sort of a general baseball take. But how do you feel about the opener as a thing in general? And is there something that the Blue Jays should probably try to explore if they continue to struggle with guys like Edwin Jackson?
Most definitely. I feel like the opener is a much better alternative instead of giving journeymen, as you could say, Edwin Jackson, maybe Ryan Fairbairn, players like that who are proven in the league but are simply not good at this day and age. And I feel like the Jays could benefit from the opener, say maybe as you said, Daniel Hudson could come in for 2 innings, put in Sam Gaviglia in the ball game. Even Thomas Pannone, give these guys experience in the game. They're young players, and they're more exciting to watch than players like Edwin Jackson, in my opinion.
No doubt. I think we both agree that the opener is probably the way to go. But as I mentioned before, there's a double standard to having an opener. You obviously have to have guys who can pitch the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh inning, after a guy gives you 1 inning. And I think a big part of why the Blue Jays haven't done that is that they don't have the depth. And once again, that comes back to the whole depth issue. They don't have a guy who can pitch the next 6 innings for them. While, you can throw in a Thomas Pannone or Sam Gaviglia in for inning number 1, but what are you going to do after that? So I guess that's probably a big reason why they haven't resorted to that. We've seen the Blue Jays use the opener once with Daniel Hudson this season. And I guess, again, the problem is they just don't have the depth to do it. And now we're going to pivot over from the Blue Jays team in general. This past week, the MLB draft occurred. It's a 3-day draft, I believe. And the Blue Jays picked 11th in the draft. You might want to take the floor here and talk about their first pick, the 11th selection in the draft.
Yep, so in the Major League MLB draft this past week, on Monday, the Blue Jays had a first-round selection, and that was 11th, and they picked right-hand pitcher Alex Manoah from the University of West Virginia. And Alex is a really fun player to watch in university, pitching in the Big 12 tournament this past year, and the Big 12 league. He's been really dynamite for them, pitching almost under a 2.04 ERA. He is a tank, as you would say. He is a big guy, Joe Biagini-esque type of guy, more built like a linebacker. He has a really solid fastball coming from a high angle, which can really deceive pitchers. His secondary pitches are not his best, and that's why some scouts have saw him dropping in the draft. And some other scouts really believe that Alec was the best pitching draft. So for the Blue Jays to draft a player from that ask and perspective, I feel like it was a steal for them. And Alex has college experience, so he will sign for the Blue Jays.
I think we talked about this a little off air a while ago about how we differ in terms of draft, as Eric Sogard just singles up the middle. He's going for 2. Can he get in there? And he does. Leadoff double. Eric Sogard, MVP, and the Blue Jays' best player. Anyway, going back to the MLB draft, you've heard me say before, I feel that MLB draft drafts in general in any sport, they're